And before I start, I'd like to give a brief land acknowledgement that we are located on the Cuisine, an ancestral and unceded territory of Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, successors to the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. And while each and every one of us is aware of this, we also encourage you to engage with this knowledge and engage with these people, and to also say that many things are happening around this campus with this band, and ARF encourages you to reach out and get to know them better. For example, there's some new exhibits up at the Science Museum on the Hill that are expressly linked to the Ohlone people. So there's many things you can do to engage with them. So we encourage that. But today, are we ready? Oh, I've got it right here. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, who is Natasha Fernández-Preston, which you could see, and you will in a minute. This is a fancy dance between many computers. And she has been working for some years now on this research. And so we're going to get her current status of sort of a long-term arc of research, which is very exciting. She received her BA at the University of Puerto Rico, where she was raised as well. She has been a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow when she was at the University of Puerto Rico. And since her interest brought her here to UC Berkeley, which we're thrilled, she's received a series of different awards and grants on her engagement and work with food, political economy, social and environmental justice. And that is what we're going to hear today, where she is talking about her dissertation research. And the title is From Farming to Importing Food, Colonial Racial Capitalism, Sovereignty, and Cuisine in the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico from 1919 to the present. And it's wonderful, detailed information. So I hope you're all excited and looking forward to this, as am I. So welcome, Natasha.
Thank you. It's okay. It's okay. Okay. So, hi everybody. I won't repeat the title, as you guys can see it on screen, but I'll be talking about food, colonial racial capitalism, well, sovereignty and cuisine in Puerto Rico. So the background that that led me to study this is that currently 85% of the food that is consumed in Puerto Rico is imported, and there is a lack of agriculture. But this has not always been the case. Puerto Rico used to be an agricultural island, and as we will see, several things, policies, and different dynamics were enacted, and we're now at the current state where Puerto Rico imports 85% of the food that it consumes. And although this had been a long time coming, like there had been, I remember me being a child, like listening, oh, we import, at that moment it was 80. We import 80% of the food that we consume, like, what are we gonna do? But most people just, it wasn't a priority. But then Hurricane Maria really put these vulnerabilities to the forefront. And now there's a lot of more consciousness on, just how problematic this can be and what can be done to change this. So my research questions are, how and why did Puerto Rico change from an agricultural archipelago to one that imports 85% of the food that it consumes? How do food practices and cuisine relate to the processes of colonial racial capitalism? And how do these food practices and cuisine relate to ideas and enactments of sovereignty? So I'll start a little bit by defining some concepts. I take the idea and the difference between cooking and cuisine from Jack Goody. He explored this difference between what is cooking, which is the act of preparing food by combining, mixing, and heating ingredients, versus cuisine, which are the ideals for these cooking practices. But here, I expand a little bit on the idea of cuisine, more than just cooking ideals to just food practice ideas. So in that case, including culture, including trade, and including all sorts of food practices that that come to affect how a meal gets in your plate, basically. And cuisine is cemented in collective historical and cultural memories and imageries, and it's tied to place and the land. Colonial racial capitalism is basically, these three concepts are so interrelated that they shouldn't be separated, because usually we think about them differently, like affecting in different ways, different situations like colonialism, racialization, capitalism. But in this context, at least examining food in Puerto Rico, they all work together in a certain way. So colonialism is the domination of a people or area by a foreign state or nation, and the practice of extending and maintaining a nation's political economic control over another people or area. Racial capitalism is the process by which these dynamics, the dynamics of capitalism, thinking about them as accumulation and dispossession, credit and debt, production and surplus, capitalist, worker, et cetera, how they become articulated through race. And then colonial racial capitalism is an intervention that North American indigenous studies does to the concept of of racial capitalism by pointing out how this concept of primitive accumulation was not just a moment in capitalism, rather it is a constant and ongoing organizing principle of how capitalism works. They center on this concept of land in Marxist understandings of primitive accumulation, far more than being a stage, it is ongoing. So, and then sovereignty, just briefly going into the concept of sovereignty, which I could go a little more, but here it'll be understood as self-determination and the possibility of imagining futures beyond colonial racial capitalism paradigms. In a sense, it's a decolonial option. So where is Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico is in the Caribbean, and I have an aerial photograph of Puerto Rico. A little bit of the background of US and Puerto Rico relations. After the Spanish-American War in 1898, Puerto Rico, alongside the Philippines and Guam, passed on to being a US territory. At that moment, the United States wasn't too sure what to do with this newly acquired territories, but basically the government created this legal concept that's unaffiliated territory, which is what Puerto Rico continues to be today. And then in 1917, the Jones Act was passed, which is a law that determines that all of the merchandise that goes to and from Puerto Rico needs to be passed through US shipping lines. And this has basically affected just the capability of Puerto Rico of being able to assert its own economic decision, because everything needs to pass through US shipping lines. And for the most part, the economic relationship is then with the United States. And so in a way, the economy was left defenseless to US market prices in products. So Puerto Rico, since sugarcane first arrived to Puerto Rico by the Spanish in the 16th century, and then in the 19th century, there was a lot of push by the then Spanish landowners to push sugarcane, and the industry growed a lot in Puerto Rico. But then when it became an economic interest to the United States, alongside Cuba and many other of these acquired territories. So, lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. So sugarcane, when the United States comes to Puerto Rico, all these sugarcane companies from the United States come and start amassing more of the land that was dedicated to agriculture. A lot of it was subsistence agriculture, although there was a lot of sugarcane, coffee, tobacco, and all that. But the sugarcane industry came to dominate almost the whole economy of Puerto Rico, and definitely most of the land, as we will see. And with more of the land being dedicated to sugarcane production, then food importation became more necessary, although it would become more and more necessary, as we will see later on. So in the 1930s, and with the Great Depression, which also affected, it was a worldwide phenomenon, and World War II, Puerto Rico was in a moment that had a lot of poverty, people had a lot of hunger, and the local government was placing blame on the sugarcane companies, which is understandable. However, the proposal that was given by the government was to start a new development strategy called Operation Bootstrap, which has since been called industrialization by invitation and has been repeated in other localities across the Caribbean and in other nations. And it's basically bringing foreign companies to Puerto Rico to bring their business, their capital, employ the locals, and in a way foment the economy, but that capital goes back to the foreign nation. So in reality, it's not really fomenting the local economy because it's not developing an economy from the ground using those resources. And when this happened in 1947, that this Operation Bootstrap was started. In 1948, Sidney Mintz, which most of you are probably familiar with, he was an American anthropologist, best known for his studies of Caribbean, creolization, and the anthropology of food. He goes to Puerto Rico as a graduate student to study sugarcane workers. And at that moment, Operation Bootstrap had just started, so he really came in a moment where this fast industrializing economy was transitioning from agriculture, from sugarcane agriculture to a manufacturer-based economy. His initial fieldwork was one of the first studies also in anthropology that shifted the focus from studying exclusively traditional societies to more modern societies. And we'll go back to Sidney Mintz later on. One of the companies that came to Puerto Rico after Operation Bootstrap was Goya Foods. Goya Foods is owned by Spanish descendant people that moved to Puerto Rico in 1949 and then established the today global international manufacturing company, Goya Foods. And Goya has been really successful in creating and marketing products that appeal to identity. And it does so in a way that if you are buying Goya, in a way you are eating, you are consuming that sense of identity, especially in the diaspora, depending not only to Puerto Rico, Goya also markets to other Latin American countries, but especially if you are outside of your home country, eating these Goya products then gives you a sense of home. So we'll return also to Goya in 1 second. So here for my dissertation, I looked at censuses of agriculture from 1919 to 2018 and looked at the acres across towns and also the weight produced of 18 crops. I won't talk about all 18 today. I'll just focus on some. but just know that I've looked at a few more crops. Of a note, the 2018 census only sampled 8 towns because it was right after Hurricane Maria. So on those censuses, the 2018, you'll see a lot of blank spots. Those spots are not necessarily blank, but rather that they were not sampled for the census. And then I also looked at import-export records from the annual trade statistic published by the Puerto Rico Planning or Junta de Planificación. So looking at acres first, I'll start with sugarcane to kind of frame all the other foods that will look. So sugarcane, Saccharomyces officinarum, is originally from Southeast Asia, but as I already mentioned, it was brought first to Puerto Rico in the 16th century. So this is the brighter red colors are showing the towns that have more acres of sugarcane, and then the lighter red, well, the less acres, and the lightest is no sugarcane. So this is the amount of acres per town in 1919, and I'll now go through several of the years. So this is 1919, sugarcane, 1929, 1939, 1949, 2 years after Operation Bootstrap, 1959, still going strong, 1969, 78, 87, 98, and that's the last census that shows sugarcane. So yeah, there might be some, sporadic sugarcane, but it's not in the 1998. And then looking at this, we can definitely see a decrease in the amount of acres dedicated to sugarcane throughout time. Now I want to look at several subsistence crops, especially those that appeal more to that sense of identity, Puerto Ricanness, and cuisine. So manioc is an indigenous food in Puerto Rico. It's been consumed since before the Spanish, and it's used in several different types of meals. I put 2 examples there. I didn't put the names, apologies for that, but yeah, it's used for many, many different things. So this is manioc in 1929, 1939, 1949, 1959. So almost 10 years or 12 years after Operation Bootstrap. 1964, 1974, 1978, 1987, 1998, 2007, and 2018. So it's almost gone compared to what it was originally grown. And then some other 2 words, sweet potato, also an indigenous food consumed indigenous since before the Spanish in Puerto Rico. So this, in the 1918, they put sweet potatoes and yams together. So just a parenthesis, but this is sweet potatoes and yams in 1919, 1929, 1939, 1949, 1959, 1969, 78, 87, 1998, 2007, and 2018. And then yams, sweet potatoes and yams, 1918, 29, 39, 49, 59, 69, 78, 87, 98, 2007, and 2018. And then last of the tubers, tanier. It's an indigenous food to Puerto Rico as well. We have the taniers in 1929, 1939, 49, 59, 69, 78, 87, 98, 2007, 2018. So we can definitely see a decline, especially as we have seen of tubers throughout time, which is surprising in the sense that these were pretty much the sustenance of people for a long time. Now let's look at rice. Rice and beans is known as the national dish in Puerto Rico. So just a little parenthesis, there's two types of rice that could have been historically important in Puerto Rico, Oryza sativa, which is the one that today is most more produced in a global scale, and then Oryza glaberrima, which was yes, domesticated. Yeah, it was domesticated in Africa. And but for now, in the 20th century, what we're going to be focusing is mostly Oryza sativa, which is the one that's just produced in a mass scale. So this is rice in 1919, 29, 39, 49, 59, 82. There was an industry in the north trying to grow a lot of rice. 87, and then that's the last time that rice was appeared on the census, which is surprising. And well, it's not that surprising, but rice is in essence the core foodstuff that most people eat in Puerto Rico on a daily basis. So beans, also an indigenous foodstuff, kidney beans. Let's look at kidney beans throughout time. This is kidney beans in 1919, 29, 39, 49, 59, 69, 78, 87, 98, 2007, 2018. So it's almost disappeared as well. And the last of these maps that I'll show is pigeon peas is an African pea that's widely consumed also in Puerto Rico. So this is peas in 1919, 29, 39, 49, 59, 69, 78, 87, 98, 2007, 2018. So we can see how most of these agricultural crops and just subsistence foods have almost disappeared, even though there's some acres here and there. We can definitely see in most of them, but compared to how they were originally grown in the past is almost, yeah, it's not even comparable. So here we can see just the same thing that I was showing, the acres throughout time, and we can definitely see the decline of rice, beans, and pigeon peas. And oh, I have one more. And plantain, I wanted to also mention plantain is because this one had a little bit of a different trajectory. Also a very important food in Puerto Rico. And this is plantains in 1940, 50, 59, 69, 74. And then it starts getting a little stronger, 93, 98, 2007, and 2018. These are the only towns that were sampled. So it seems to be strong in all of them. So plantains, differently from the other crops, seems to have had at least some sort of fomentation in the 90s and continues today. So now we're going to look at the harvested weight data. So this is the production in pounds of products from 1919 to 2018. So all the products that I've been looking at and just the harvested weight, we can definitely see how sugarcane is the most harvested crop throughout time. But now taking out sugarcane, so we can visualize the other stuff, we see bananas, a lot of harvested bananas. We see coconuts, pineapples, coffee, corn, not a lot of rice, some tubers, even though we know that they go down. Also beans, even though that they will go down. So just to kind of have that framework. And now looking at the imports and export data. So this is the pounds of food imported into Puerto Rico from the United States from 1939 to 1970. And rice and beans are, well, there's rice, potatoes, tomatoes, beans are some of the products that are, imported a lot in this period. But surprisingly, there's a little spike of corn, which we were wondering, like, what is that? Like, there was no cuisine shift on eating more corn. We'll put a pin on it and we'll return to it in 1 second. Yeah, just keep in mind that the corn, something's up with the corn. So imported food, this is the pounds of food imported to Puerto Rico from foreign countries through US shipping lines. But just so you have that, just that information, you got potatoes, sugar, tomatoes, and corn. And then the pounds of food exported from Puerto Rico to the United States in this same period. We can see that sugar and sugar products are the most imported, and we see a little bit of pineapples there. Taking out the sugar, pineapples is a big one, exported a lot. And we also see coconut, some roots and tubers. So it's expected, not talking about it a lot here, but pineapples and coconuts are also cash crops. And then pounds of food exported from Puerto Rico to foreign countries, same sugar, taking sugar out. Then there's also a lot of corn exported, coffee, beans, tomatoes, pineapples, and some tubers. So, and now comparing this harvested versus import-export weights in the same period, 1939 to 1969, we see here, this is harvested beans. You'll see here, this corn is harvested, the first column, and then the second one is pounds imported from the United States, pounds imported from foreign countries, pounds exported to United States, and pounds exported to foreign countries. We can see how as rice and beans, the amount harvested of rice and beans went down, the amount of pounds imported also went up, but in an exponential manner, it would seem. Differently, we see the tubers, who we know also the acres went down, well, the weight per harvested also went down, but it wasn't replaced by importing tubers, which is interesting. So definitely that also implies a certain shift in cuisine and in eating habits. And we can see the top. Well, the first one is pigeon peas, and that one had a little more variability. There was continued to be harvested pigeon peas, but there was also some imported. To the right, we have tomatoes, and that one had a similar pattern to the rice and beans, which also makes sense. The harvest, there was some tomato harvested, but then there was a lot of tomatoes imported and tomato products. And then the bananas and plantains, that was more similar to the tuber pattern, where it seemed like they were mostly stayed for local commerce, because it wasn't exported, and it also there wasn't a lot imported to replace that. So now returning to sugarcane. So the first graph that we see up is the pounds of sugarcane harvested. And we can see that, as we know, there was a lot of sugarcane harvested. But what's weird is that there was almost nothing exported of sugarcane. So what was happening with the sugarcane there, which was really interesting. But then we can probably see how that correlates with the data of the corn, because this is just as a background, the acres of corn harvested in Puerto Rico that declined as well. But in 1970, there was a lot of corn and corn products imported to Puerto Rico. As sugarcane is also not being exported. So that implies that maybe these products are being used as sugar, as sucrose, as fructose for processed foods. And then we can return to Sidney Mintz as he talks how sugar, sucrose, is the favorite child of capitalism. And in a way it is, it has gone along this, alongside this industrial shift in economic and worker relations, and it, alongside coffee, you need coffee and sugar to be productive. And definitely we see how sugar is, in a sense, it goes alongside capitalism in its changing shifts. And this is sugar consumption, sugar and sweetener consumption in the United States. In the UK, we can't see the top, but it's from 1700 to 2005. And you can see that it's growing exponentially, but we can also see how in 1960, 65, there's suddenly a shift, or a lot of corn sweeteners being used, which also then correlates with the data that we saw of suddenly a lot of corn being imported to Puerto Rico. And corn is in corn. Well, yeah, sugar is in everything in our, everything processed in our modern world. Like all this has sugar because it's used for preservation. It's used for appealing palate, getting people to want to buy more and consume more. But what does this have to do in Puerto Rico? So this is Goya, a Goya Foods factory in Puerto Rico. It's located in Bayamon, and it's the biggest factory in Latin America of Goya. I think it's one of the biggest in the world, but at least in Latin America, it's definitely the biggest. And in this facility, these are some of the foods that they mostly, oh, this is me, I went there a few years ago. These are some of the products that are made in this facility. They make beans, tomato sauce, rice, and in addition to other products. And when I went to Goya Foods and I interviewed a representative in 2019, I asked her, where does Goya get their ingredients? I mean, she wasn't trying to share a lot, but but she was mostly like, oh, Goya used to buy a lot from local agriculture, but Puerto Rico can no longer meet Goya's demand, which is understandable because it's a huge corporation. So what this means is that all the ingredients that go into these products are imported to Puerto Rico, and then they are sold in the local market, but also exported elsewhere. And sugar is imported. Sorry, sugar is important for these products. This is this tomato sauce can has 2 grams of sugar, which is a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot, but imagine all the cans of tomato sauce that they're making. And same with these other products. This is 34 grams of sugar, 23 grams added. I put it there, like what 23 grams of sugar is. Imagine millions and millions of these bottles, of these cans. That's a lot of sugar. So definitely, it seems that the pattern that we're seeing with sugarcane, with corn, relates to this manufacturing industry of producing all these processed foods. So I wanted to just throw a little bit of some books I was looking at. Basically, what sparked out to me, all of these are looking at stewed beans. What sparked most to me is how 1972 and 1954 had more similarities. They're all using kind of the same ingredients, just dried beans, and there's this pumpkin, and and you cut it and all that. But then the 19, which doesn't say the date there, sorry about that, 1997 one has a lot of more ingredients added to it. A lot of them are ingredients that are already branded by Goya. They don't put Goya necessarily, but the recaito, there's something that Goya is producing over here. They got there's more use of cooked beans, which you can definitely cook them yourself, but there's definitely a lot of more use of cans. And then they specify using tomato sauce. These earlier cookbooks do not even put tomato sauce in the recipe, but the later cookbook puts tomato sauce. So well, actually the middle one puts it optional. So, but then it becomes a little more necessary. So what does it mean to eat a dish of rice and beans in Puerto Rico composed of imported ingredients? And I've been pondering that a lot, and it definitely just relates to this concept of colonial racial capitalism, of of land becomes separated from food, from identity. It is not necessarily, it is no longer important where the food comes from, as long as you're eating the right ingredients. And that also relates to just this idea of land expropriation, and just you are in a way forced to participate in this global market, because if you don't have the means of acquiring these ingredients at home, but you want to consume those ingredients that call home to you, then you have to participate in this global market. But it's not all, bad. Especially after Hurricane Maria, there's been a growing agroecological movement in Puerto Rico, and it continues to grow, and there's new cohorts of people becoming farmers and small-scale farmers. But it's still, well, we have to see the next agriculture census, what it shows. But for now, it doesn't seem like it necessarily competes with the amount of importation, but that'll take some time. But I wanted to also translate this quote. Says, the first sovereignty is organize us all in our land to produce our own food. So next steps, a little bit, I'll be finishing my import-export record from 1978 to 2018, then comparing the amount that is fresh versus processed foods in these records, and then looking at the cookbooks a little more, and then another census comes out this year, but I've been told I cannot look at it until after I finish my dissertation. And these are the references, and I also wanted to end with this quote, for a colonized people, the most essential value, because the most concrete, is first and foremost the land which will bring them bread, and above all, dignity. From Frantz Fanon. Thank you.
You will take questions for a few minutes.
Awesome. That was totally awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
In looking at one of the things, I totally sold on the sugar argument, but one of the other things that you're going to need to be able to talk about is going back to Min's.
Yeah.
Is rum. And the role of rum production, given that Bacardi moves its factory, I think in the 30s to Puerto Rico.
Yes.
We've got prohibition and the Caribbean providing illegal rum to the US. And then you've got also the tourism side of things is interesting, because you have the creation of the pina colada, and then you have an increase in your pineapples, your coconuts.
Yes, and sugar.
So you might
Yeah.
just want to make sure that you're talking about that there's these clips that may be from tourism.
Yeah.
The other thing that might be worth looking at is what school programs might be going on too, in terms of trying to Americanize Puerto Rican diets. And if you're getting any of these kind of like stereotypical American foods being forced on people like corn. I mean,
Yeah.
corn, friggin' stewed corn and little peas and carrots were like part of federally provided school lunch programs through the 50s, 60s, 70s. It may just so that you can like show that you've considered it
Yeah.
and push it away.
Yes, definitely.
But-
And there definitely, I've seen that corn also became big, especially uh, World War II. Uh, I just wasn't convinced that there was more corn consumption than rice. You know, it seemed like, yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, definitely. All the, definitely, definitely. Thank you.
What's happening with the land if it's Goya isn't using industrial agriculture but is importing, what's happening with the land?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, right now there's a lot of land that is just being reforested, or a lot of it that's just being developed. Uh, there's, you know, a lot of new, yeah, yeah, for housing, for malls, for building more highways, for all these sorts of things that happen. But yeah, there's a lot of open space, open land that could be grown for agriculture, but right now it's just being left, you know, not necessarily being used for anything until someone wants to use it to build things.
Great talk. Thank you, ma'am. One of the things that kind of popped for me was, and I don't know Puerto Rican geography very well, I apologize. But a lot of the maps you were showing, I kept seeing these moments where, at least in the middle part of the landmass, that there was a little something different going on.
Yeah,
And especially when you start talking about things like corn and things,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, we're one of the places where I work in South Africa. We talked about how millet and sorghum in the hills persist in ways when the rest of the country is growing corn. Is there anything about the geography of Puerto Rico and the way that people are kind of, it sounds like they're recognizing this moment post Maria that
Yeah.
is kind of connecting these hill folk with
Yeah.
the way that they're making choices?
yeah. Let me go a little bit to go back to the beginning where I have the map. Okay, I'll just start talking while it's going back. But the basically the middle part of the island is mountainous. So
Right.
that's been historically a region that has a lot of agriculture. So that's why most of the maps you would see a lot of concentration in the middle, except sugarcane. And I didn't show it today, but coconuts, those are mostly concentrated on the outskirts, on the more closer to the beach, to the coast. But definitely there's, you know, there here we are. There's,
Mhm.
you know, the whole middle part is mountainous. Right now there's a lot of just forest. I mean, there's been a lot of reforestation, which is great. You know, it's not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's great.
Sure.
But you know, there could be a little more of a better balance because yeah, there's reforestation in certain areas, but then there's, you know, they're converting it slowly to tourism. So
Oh, okay. So the totally different industry and competition.
yeah,
Because sometimes those big corporate agribusinesses have a harder time making those mountainous landscapes do what they want, right? Ordering nature in the way they want to make it happen.
yeah. Well, it depends on the crop, definitely. Definitely, because coffee, for example, that's
Oh.
one that I didn't mention today, but coffee is a mountainous crop,
Right.
and coffee is one that continues strong today. I mean, not as much as in the past, but coffee continues to be grown, surprisingly. So that's something.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha. Amazing. It's very interesting. Moreover, because I'm from Spain, so it's something that touched my heart somehow. And I would like to comment a couple of things and to ask something. And first of all, this Goya company is very interesting because it's a brand that in Spain doesn't exist.
Wow.
And you have said something about keeping the identity, right?
Mhm.
And it's curious also because Goya had to leave Spain because of his ideas. And finally, he died in France, you
Yes.
know. And finally, they tried to keep it as a Spanish identity, right?
Yeah.
That's a curious going and back ideas. But
Mm.
my question was because Puerto Rico and Cuba
Mhm.
were the last Spanish colonies, and
Yeah.
they lost it in
Spanish.
if I remember well in 1898, something
Yes.
like this, right?
Yes.
And then the question is it known how could this disappearance of the Spanish market, these companies of importation and exportation, could develop this lack of harvest of this market?
Well, I haven't looked at that transition period a lot, but from what I've read, I know that when that transition happened, it actually caused a lot of issues to the current landowners in Puerto Rico, sugarcane, coffee, because obviously they had this market with Spain and with Europe, and then suddenly it was kind of wiped away. And also when the dollar was introduced, it devalued a lot of the land and the local coin at that moment. So a lot of these landowners ended up losing that land, and then was acquired by American landowners, U.S. American. So yeah, there's that happening. Interesting what you were mentioning about Goya, because yeah, I just think it's extremely interesting how they are able to just become malleable in the sense that they're able to market to so many Latin American countries. It's interesting that in Spain it's kind of like, no.
Now, you know, it's very north Spain at the moment. It's very confusing.
Yeah. Interesting.
Because of his liberal ideas, the king didn't want these liberal ideas in Spain.
Hmm. Interesting.
Natasha, thank you for your fascinating talk. I'm really interested in this question of subsistence agricultural practices and like the reason that they were abandoned. You mentioned at the beginning about certain economic and political decisions that influenced that, but I'm not entirely convinced that like this would be enough for people to give up subsistence agriculture. So like I'll give an example. Like I come from Russia,
Yeah.
where throughout the 20th century, like agriculture was modernized, large socialized farms.
Yeah.
Throughout, people still kept like small plots and tried to cultivate like tomatoes, da da da. Part of it was necessity because socialized agriculture could not feed
Yeah.
people and could not provide enough. So people had to keep cultivating. And another part was that, like, in people's minds, like ideas about like eating the food that you've produced by yourself, like it
Yeah.
is like healthier, it's better for you, it's like this and that. So all these ideas, they kind of helped them stick to subsistence
Yeah.
agriculture, even though the state really pushed to like eliminate it altogether. And so like I wonder if like what would like what are the ethics around like food consumption and food production that like kind of maybe um kind of helped these changes like happen more easily in a place like Puerto Rico, or I don't know, or maybe my hypothesis is like out of
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a great point. Like, why would people stop farming? Doesn't make sense. But it was a lot of things that seemed to be at play. It was not only just the government, saying, oh, we're no longer farming. It was it was the government started buying back a lot of the land from the people who owned it because they were like, oh, we're gonna use this for creating, forgot the name, it was like social benefit farms to feed the people. But then, and a lot of people were selling their land because they were, giving cash. And in that moment, there was a lot of poverty. So people were inclined to take that. But then these social benefit farms, I forgot the exact term, just didn't work out. And then that land ended up being developed. And as this was happening, there was also a lot of migration. There was a lot of impulse of sending Puerto Ricans from the island to work in farms in Hawaii, in New Jersey, in New York, in factories. And so there was a lot of movement of people outside the island. And then the people who lived in rural started moving more to the urban area. And there's also this idea that farming was somehow retrograde. And that was something that unfortunately continued on until, I still have heard it in my generation. I know that my grandparents' generation were the ones who kind of, stopped farming. They used to farm, they saw the farm, but they kind of, they found a better quality of life in a different industry or whatever. But then my parents' generation really didn't see farming as anything with a future, So a lot of people in that generation just became engineers, things that, would help continue developing the island. But not a lot of people were interested in agriculture. And it's not until recently that there's been more of a push for that. And there's definitely have been people who continue farming in their, in their homes. But in terms of providing enough food to feed the whole island, it just kind of went away. And I don't think that it's necessarily that people, just wanted to stop farming, but just the economic pressures just forced them to stop farming because it was cheaper to buy this rice to feed your 8 people family, than to, grow a little bit of food that wasn't enough to feed everybody. So there's just, a lot of things that were happening.
So that you really need to consider the enduring ecological impacts of sugar production.
Yeah.
Sugar, at least from my experiences in Louisiana, any cane of sugar can only be harvested off the same stalk 3 years in a row. And then you've got mandatory fallow periods. So in any plantation, you're going to have a mosaic of cane that's under different moments of cultivation, and you're going to have large chunks of land that are not being productive. So it's also extremely labor intensive. So if you've got a monoculture like you had for sugar in Puerto Rico, people are going to be associating farming with being forced labor on those plantations.
Yes.
And sugar is one of the worst crops. The only thing worse is salt raking. So you're going to have that enduring impact of the soil exhaustion from the sugarcane. You're going to have the associations of agriculture with brutality, and you're going to have, again, these sort of impacts of, there's only so much arable land that's going to be available because sugar is holding things empty, but not being under production. They're still trying to figure out good ways to co-produce on sugar land in Louisiana. That's why so much poverty exists in Louisiana. Same sort of problem. You don't have these big agricultural production because you're still dealing with propped up sugar industry and the enduring impacts of sugar and cotton.
Thank you.
I could just add on to that. We talked quite a bit about all of this, which is wonderful to hear, to think about it again. But what your data are showing, besides that sugar story, are all the other staple crops that are going away that people did produce, as you
Yeah.
say, with the root crops for millennia.
Yeah.
And then with the rice and beans, which is sort of colonial, a
Yeah.
colonial food, right, from
Yeah.
Africa, essentially.
Yeah.
And that also was being grown and consumed there, and that has gone away. So you have these waves of of subsistence, because the sugar cane's never been what people are living on. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
eating that the morning, noon, and night. That's a cash crop. So you have these two stories going on, and they're saying, they're both pointing to the same thing about someone making decisions about how this, and manipulating the economics
Yeah.
of how they're producing, which is what you're tracking.
Yes, yes, definitely. I remember us talking when I first was looking at these maps, how it seemed like it was a bit sinister how, how subsistence foods were the first ones to go away. Because sugarcane continued very well until the 90s at least. So yes, it seems like it wasn't by accident.
Well, I think we're now a little over, and I can see Malcolm getting very excited. So
Yeah.
thank you very
Yeah. Thank you.